Mark Reynolds had always prided himself on being a practical man, someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. But when he moved with his wife Emily and their daughter Sophie into a sleek, modern apartment on the 13th floor of Riverside Towers in downtown Seattle, the rain-soaked city where the family was beginning a new chapter, everything changed. It was late October, the rainy season, and the constant downpour added a gloomy edge to the otherwise pristine apartment. The building itself was luxurious, with polished glass windows offering sweeping views of the city skyline and the nearby bay. The 13th floor was the highest in the building, a level some buildings avoided due to superstition. But not Riverside Towers. Mark, of course, shrugged it off. "It's just a number," he told Emily as they settled in. The first few days went smoothly enough. Sophie loved the view from her bedroom window, watching the rain cascade down the glass. Emily enjoyed the modern kitchen and the open layout of their new space. But then strange things started happening. It began with the TV. One evening, as the rain pounded against the windows, Mark sat in the living room, flipping through channels. Suddenly, the screen went blank, then static filled the display. Annoyed, he reached for the remote to turn it off, but the static changed. Brief flashes of images appeared. Fuzzy figures, faces twisted in unnatural expressions, and a strange whispering sound that sent chills up his spine. "Mark, what's wrong with the TV?" Emily asked, walking in from the kitchen. "I'm not sure," he muttered, turning it off. But even after it powered down, the strange feeling lingered, like they were being watched. That night, as they lay in bed, the rain continued to beat against the windows. At 3 a.m., Mark was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of the television turning on by itself. Static again. Only this time, the whispers were louder. He rushed into the living room, his heart racing. The TV was blaring static, and for a moment, through the fuzzy distortion, he could have sworn he saw someone standing there, a figure on the other side of the screen. He yanked the plug out of the wall, and the TV went black. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked from behind him, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah, just a power glitch," he said, trying to sound calm. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, things escalated. The television would turn on at random times, always in the dead of night, always the same static-filled screen with those faint whispering voices. Sophie, who had been excited about her new room, began complaining about nightmares. She said a man was talking to her through the TV in her room, asking her to come play with him. Mark and Emily tried to brush it off as a child's imagination, but the fear in Sophie's eyes was undeniable. Emily insisted they move the TV out of Sophie's room, but even without it, Sophie would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, claiming the man was still there. Then came the messages. One night, as Mark was sitting alone in the living room, staring at the rain streaking down the windows, the TV came to life again, static filling the screen. This time, it didn't just whisper. Words formed in the distortion, appearing on the screen like a message. "Help me." Mark froze, his blood running cold. The words flickered for a moment before disappearing into the static. He unplugged the TV again, but the unsettling feeling that something was in the apartment with them wouldn't go away. They called a repairman to check the electronics, but he found nothing wrong. The TV shouldn't have been turning on by itself, he said. It must be an electrical issue, maybe something with the building's wiring. But Mark knew better. This wasn't faulty wiring. Emily, growing more anxious by the day, suggested they get help from a paranormal investigator. Mark scoffed at the idea until Sophie started speaking to someone who wasn't there. One rainy evening, Mark found her in the living room, staring at the unplugged television, quietly talking to herself. "Sophie, who are you talking to?" he asked, his heart thudding in his chest. She turned to him, her face pale, eyes wide. "The man in the TV. He says he's stuck. He wants us to help him." Mark's stomach churned. This wasn't just a child's imagination anymore. Something was very, very wrong. The next day, they called in a local psychic named Evelyn Thomas. She arrived on another stormy evening, her face drawn and serious as she entered the apartment. As soon as she stepped inside, she stopped and looked around, her eyes narrowing. "There's something here," she said quietly, "something restless." She walked through the apartment, stopping in front of the TV. Without touching it, she closed her eyes, her face tensing. "There's a spirit trapped here. Evelyn said after a long pause. It's using the television as a conduit to communicate. Who is it? Emily asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, Evelyn replied, but I sense great pain, fear. Whoever it is, they died here, on this floor. Mark's stomach dropped. But this building is new. No one's died here. Evelyn shook her head. It wasn't always Riverside Towers. There was another building here before it, an old hotel. It burned down years ago. A man died on the 13th floor. His spirit never left. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the windows as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the television screen lit up on its own, showing the same static. Help me, the screen displayed again, this time clearer than ever. Evelyn closed her eyes, murmuring something under her breath. Suddenly, the static stopped and the TV shut off completely. It's not just a haunting, Evelyn said gravely. The spirit is trapped, and he's trying to escape. But why through the TV? Emily asked, her voice shaking. Evelyn hesitated. Because it's the only way he can reach you. The energy from the electronics allows him to manifest. But there's something else here. Something darker, keeping him trapped. That night, the family decided to stay in a hotel while Evelyn worked to cleanse the apartment. But before they left, as Mark took one last look at the darkened TV screen, he saw it. A faint reflection in the blackness. A face, watching him from the other side. The rain continued to fall, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the lost soul on the 13th floor. They never returned to the apartment. The spirit had communicated its final message, "Let me go." And in the endless rain of Seattle, Mark realized they never should have moved into that cursed floor in the first place. The rain poured relentlessly as Claire Harper pulled her car up to the iron gates of Blackwood Manor, her family's ancestral estate deep in the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest. The sky above was a churning sea of dark clouds, and the winding road she had traveled was almost swallowed by the towering trees and constant downpour. She hadn't set foot in this place since she was a child, but now, with her estranged father, Thomas Harper, missing for months, something had drawn her back. There were no answers from the police, no leads, and no sign of him in the bustling city of Portland where he lived. His last known location? Blackwood Manor. As Claire stepped out of the car, the cold rain seeped into her bones, the wind howling through the ancient oak trees that surrounded the manor like silent sentinels. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and pushed open the rusted gate, its eerie creak echoing through the stormy night. The manor loomed ahead, a hulking Gothic structure with ivy crawling up its stone walls. It looked as though it had been forgotten by time, its windows dark and lifeless. Claire's mother had died years ago, and her father had never been the same. She had left home young, severing ties with him in this place, but now something deeper called her back. She had to find him. She had to know the truth. Inside, the manor smelled of damp wood and decay. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the faded wallpaper, and the rain drummed incessantly on the windows as if trying to break in. Claire shivered, not just from the cold, but from a growing sense of dread. The old housekeeper, Martha, greeted her at the door with a tight smile. Her gray hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her eyes darted nervously as she led Claire to the sitting room. The atmosphere inside the house was oppressive, like the walls were holding on to secrets they refused to share. "Miss Claire, it's been so long," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry about your father. We've heard nothing since he left." Claire nodded, though her unease deepened. Everyone in town had told her the same thing. Thomas Harper had vanished without a trace, but she knew there was more to the story. Blackwood Manor had always been shrouded in mystery, its history marked by strange occurrences and whispers of a family curse. "Where did he go, Martha?" Claire asked, her voice firmer than she felt. "What was he doing before he disappeared?" Martha's hands shook slightly as she poured tea. "He spent most of his time in the study, going through old papers, records about the family history. He was obsessed, something about the past." Claire felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew her father had been obsessed with uncovering the truth about their family, about the tragedies that had befallen the Harpers over the centuries. But this time, it had cost him something more. As the night wore on, Claire wandered the halls of the manor, following the memories that surfaced from her childhood. She found her father's study, the room where he had spent his final days before disappearing. It was a mess, books strewn everywhere, papers scattered across the desk, and the windows covered in dust as if they hadn't been opened in years. On the desk, Claire found an old journal. Her father's handwriting was scrawled across the pages, but the entries became more erratic as the dates progressed. "They're all hiding something," one entry read. "The Harpers were never innocent. The truth is buried, but I'm so close to finding it. They're watching me. Everyone is watching me." Claire's heart raced as she flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of her father's ramblings. Who was they? And what had her father discovered that made him so paranoid? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep in the house. Claire's blood turned to ice as she realized she wasn't alone. She grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. She reached the basement door, an old, creaky thing that had always terrified her as a child. It was slightly ajar, and Claire could hear something. Voices, whispers, coming from below. The basement was damp and cold, the air thick with mold and decay. As Claire descended the stairs, the whispers grew louder, and she realized with horror that they weren't just in her head. Someone, or something, was down here. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. In the far corner of the basement, she saw a figure, a man hunched over, his back to her. Her breath caught in her throat as she approached slowly. "Dad?" she whispered. The figure turned, and Claire gasped. It wasn't her father. It was James, the family lawyer. His eyes were wild, and his clothes were soaked from the rain as if he had been outside moments ago. He held a bundle of old papers in his hands, shaking them at Claire with a crazed look in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed. "This place, it's cursed, and now you're part of it." "Where's my father, James?" Claire demanded, backing away from him. "He found out," James muttered, pacing back and forth. "He found out the truth, the things your family has done. But it's too late. You can't escape. None of us can." Before Claire could respond, a door slammed shut above them, and heavy footsteps echoed down the basement stairs. Martha appeared at the top, her face twisted into an unnatural smile. "Lalibert, you were never supposed to return," she said coldly. "We tried to protect you from this, but now you're here, and the truth will consume you." Suddenly, more figures emerged from the shadows, people Claire had known her whole life. The townspeople, her father's closest friends, even the local sheriff. They had all gathered, watching her with hollow eyes as if they were no longer themselves. "The Harpers, we've been protecting a secret for centuries," Martha said, her voice a low hiss. "Your family's wealth, power, it was built on blood, and now it's your turn to pay the price." Claire's heart raced as she realized the horrifying truth. Everyone she had trusted was part of this conspiracy. Her father had uncovered the dark history of the Harpers, how they had made deals with dark forces, how their fortune was built on curses and death. The town had helped them cover it up all these years, and now they would do anything to keep that secret buried. As the group closed in on her, Claire felt trapped. The rain pounded harder against the walls of the old manor, as if the storm itself was alive, feeding off the darkness inside. But Claire wasn't ready to give up. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the halls as she raced for the front door. Outside, the rain battered her face, but she didn't care. She had to escape. She had to survive. But as she reached her car, she heard something, her father's voice, faint and desperate, carried on the wind. Turning back toward the manor, she realized with dread that she couldn't leave him behind. Not yet. The truth was out, and now Claire was part of it. It was a cold, rainy evening in the small coastal town of Ashford, Maine. The rain had been pouring for days, turning the streets into rivers of mud and the skies into an unrelenting gray blanket. The storm showed no sign of stopping, creating an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to hang over everything. Detective John Grayson sat in his office, the rhythmic sound of raindrops against the window accompanying his thoughts. His phone rang, cutting through the monotony of the storm. "Grayson," he answered, his voice gruff. "Detective," the voice on the other end said, "we have a strange case for you. Rebecca Cartwright, the CEO of Cartwright Industries, passed away last night under suspicious circumstances." But when the undertakers arrived to prepare the body for the funeral today, her body was missing. We need you on this right away. Grayson paused for a moment. Rebecca Cartwright was one of the most powerful businesswomen on the East Coast. Her sudden death alone was shocking, but a missing body? There was something deeply unsettling about the whole thing. I'm on my way, Grayson replied, grabbing his coat and hat. The rain was still coming down in sheets when he stepped outside, the cold wind biting into him as he made his way to the Cartwright mansion. The Cartwright estate sat on the outskirts of Ashford, a sprawling mansion overlooking the stormy Atlantic. As Grayson pulled up to the grand entrance, the wind howled and the rain lashed against his car. The towering mansion loomed like a dark sentinel against the tempestuous sky. Grayson was greeted at the door by William Cartwright, Rebecca's widower. William was a tall, gaunt man with sharp features, his eyes red and sunken from lack of sleep. His grief was palpable, but there was something else in his demeanor, something guarded. Detective, thank you for coming, William said, his voice flat yet heavy with emotion. I don't understand what's happened. Rebecca, she's gone. Grayson nodded and followed William inside, where the mansion's dimly lit hallways were lined with expensive art and family portraits. Everything about the place screamed wealth, but the atmosphere was thick with unease. They entered the parlor where the undertakers had been earlier that morning. The empty space where Rebecca's body should have been was unnerving. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious clues as to how the corpse had simply vanished overnight. I know this is hard, Grayson began, but I need to ask a few questions. What exactly happened the night she died? William rubbed his eyes. She wasn't feeling well. For a few doctors said it was exhaustion, stress from work. Last night, I found her in bed. She wasn't breathing. I called the doctor immediately, but it was too late. He said it was natural causes, a heart attack. Grayson nodded, but his instincts told him there was more to this story. And this morning, when the undertakers arrived, they called me from her bedroom. She was gone, just like that. The window was open, but there were no footprints, no signs of anyone breaking in. William's voice wavered slightly. It's like she disappeared into thin air. Grayson walked to the bedroom where Rebecca had died. The rain pattered against the large windows, and the room felt cold despite the heater humming softly in the corner. As he scanned the rooms, something caught his eye, a faint, muddy footprint near the window. Did you or anyone else come near this window? Grayson asked, pointing to the floor. William shook his head, his face pale. Grayson crouched to inspect the footprint more closely. It was small, almost delicate, definitely not William's. Whoever had been in the room last wasn't some intruder looking for valuables. Someone had taken Rebecca's body. Later that evening, Grayson sat in his car, the rain hammering against the windshield as he tried to piece together the clues. Something about William's story didn't add up, but Grayson couldn't quite put his finger on it. He decided to dig deeper into Rebecca's life. A woman like her didn't just vanish, even after death. Grayson began by interviewing Rebecca's colleagues and employees. She had been a formidable force in the business world, but some whispered about her strained marriage and the stress that came with running a multi-million-dollar corporation. There were rumors, too. Rumors that Rebecca had been involved in something more sinister than just corporate takeovers. Some claimed she dabbled in the occult, though Grayson brushed those aside as superstitions. But the more he investigated, the more he realized something strange had indeed surrounded Rebecca in the months leading up to her death. She had been meeting with a man named Dr. Simon Blackwell, a supposed expert in ancient rituals and folklore. The nature of their meetings was unclear, but it raised red flags for Grayson. As the storm continued to batter the town, Grayson returned to the Cartwright mansion to confront William. The man had grown more agitated since their first meeting, pacing the grand halls like a caged animal. What was Rebecca involved in, William? Grayson asked, his voice firm. I know about Dr. Blackwell. I know she was looking into something beyond the normal. You need to tell me the truth. William's face paled, and for a moment, Grayson thought he might collapse. Rebecca, she was obsessed, William stammered. She believed there was a way to live beyond death. She thought Blackwell could help her find it. She was terrified of getting old, of losing everything she'd worked for. She started practicing rituals, things I didn't understand. Grayson's stomach tightened. What kind of rituals? William swallowed hard, his hands trembling. She said she was preparing for her death, but not the way you'd think. She believed that when she died, she could come back in another body, but something went wrong. She didn't come back, and now her body is gone. Grayson stared at William, his mind racing. And Blackwell? He warned her. He said there were consequences, that meddling with forces like this could cost her more than she was willing to pay. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upstairs. Grayson and William rushed toward the source of the noise, the rain outside intensifying as if nature itself was reacting to the dark forces in play. They entered Rebecca's old bedroom to find the window wide open, rain pouring in, and a figure standing near the foot of the bed. It was Rebecca. But something was terribly wrong. Her once beautiful face was contorted, her eyes hollow and black. Her skin, pale and gaunt, was stretched tightly over her bones. She stood there, soaked from the rain, staring at William with a cold, lifeless gaze. "Rebecca?" William gasped, stepping backward. "You didn't follow the rules," she whispered, her voice hollow, echoing with something otherworldly. "I told you there would be consequences." Grayson watched in horror as Rebecca's form began to shift, her body seemingly dissolving into the shadows of the storm. Within seconds, she was gone, leaving only the cold, oppressive air behind. William collapsed to the floor, sobbing, while Grayson stood in stunned silence, the truth sinking in. Rebecca hadn't just vanished. She had become something far worse than dead. As the rain continued to fall, Grayson realized that this case wasn't just about a missing body. It was about something darker, something ancient that should have remained buried. And now, it was loose. Nestled in the serene mountains of North Carolina, the town of Maple Hollow thrived during the rainy season. The pitter-patter of raindrops created a soothing melody as Krishnakant and Lakshmi settled into their charming cabin, eager to embrace their new life. The fresh scent of wet earth filled the air, promising new beginnings. Not long after they moved in, the DaCostas, a family of 4, became their new neighbors. With warm smiles and friendly banter, the DaCostas seemed like a perfect fit for the quiet mountain community. The eldest daughter, Jenny, was particularly lively and often invited her friends over, filling the once peaceful surroundings with laughter. However, as the rain began to fall more heavily, strange things started happening. It began subtly. A flicker of the lights, the occasional sound of footsteps when no one was around. Krishnakant and Lakshmi dismissed it as the quirks of an old cabin, but Jenny's friends soon became a source of concern. One stormy evening, while thunder rumbled overhead, Jenny hosted a sleepover with her friends. They giggled and shared ghost stories, unaware of the darkness that lurked nearby. That night, as the wind howled and rain lashed against the windows, they decided to play a game they had heard about: the summoning. Armed with flashlights and an old mirror, the girls gathered in the dimly lit living room. They chanted incantations, calling forth spirits they knew nothing about. As they finished, a cold breeze swept through the cabin, extinguishing their flashlights. The room plunged into darkness, filled only with the sound of thunder. In that chilling moment, Jenny felt a sudden rush of dread. "Guys, I think we should stop," she said, her voice trembling. But her friends laughed, urging her to continue. With an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach, Jenny reluctantly joined them. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, sending them all into a panic. They rushed to investigate, only to find the pantry door swinging wildly on its hinges, as if something or someone was trapped inside. As the rain poured down, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by an eerie silence that hung thick in the air. Krishnakant and Lakshmi were alerted by the commotion and rushed over, only to find the girls huddled together, wide-eyed and terrified. "What happened?" Lakshmi asked, concern etched on her face. "We were just playing a game, and then something. It was in there." Jenny stammered, pointing to the pantry. Krishnakant, skeptical yet worried, stepped toward the pantry. He opened the door slowly, revealing nothing but darkness. As he flicked the light switch, the bulb flickered ominously before stabilizing, illuminating an empty space. "It's just a trick of the light. You girls need to stop messing around," he reassured them, but unease clung to him like the humidity in the air. Days passed, and the girls continued to experience unsettling occurrences. Shadows danced just out of sight, whispers echoed through the halls, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The DeCostas began to notice strange marks on the walls of their home, deep scratches that seemed to appear overnight. One night, as a torrential downpour engulfed Maple Hollow, Krishnakant and Lakshmi were jolted awake by blood-curdling screams. They rushed to the DeCosta's cabin, only to find Jenny's friends in a frenzy, frantically trying to wake her. Jenny lay motionless, her face pale, with a twisted expression of terror frozen on her features. The girls insisted that Jenny had been possessed, that she had spoken in voices not her own, warning them to leave the house. With no time to waste, they sought help, reaching out to local spiritual leaders who confirmed their worst fears. A malevolent spirit had been summoned and was now tormenting them. The following night, the storm raged with a vengeance. Determined to end the nightmare, Krishnakant and Lakshmi, along with the DeCostas, gathered in their living room, armed with salt, candles, and prayers. They faced the darkness head-on, chanting incantations meant to banish the spirit. As the clock struck midnight, the wind howled louder, and the very walls of the cabin seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the pantry, and an icy wind swept through the room. The candles flickered, nearly extinguishing, casting haunting shadows on their faces. In the chaos, Krishnakant felt a heavy presence pressing down on him, threatening to consume him. But he stood firm, raising his voice above the storm, determined to reclaim their home. With each prayer, the air grew thick with tension, until finally a deafening silence fell. In that stillness, they felt a shift. A final desperate shriek echoed through the cabin, and then nothing. The oppressive weight lifted, leaving behind an eerie calm. As dawn broke, the rain began to subside, washing away the remnants of terror. Jenny awoke, confused but unharmed. Her friends gathered around her in relief. Krishnakant and Lakshmi exchanged glances, grateful to have survived the night but aware that the scars of their experience would linger. Months later, as the leaves turned gold in the crisp autumn air, the Costas decided to leave Maple Hollow, unable to shake the memories of that harrowing night. Krishnakant and Lakshmi remained, cherishing their peace, but wary of the darkness that had nearly consumed them. As the sun set over the mountains, the winds whispered secrets of the past, reminding them that some doors should never be opened, especially in the shadows of a storm. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.